pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to everyone here, and there is no one who's on the public comment list, so we're going to dive straight into content for the evening. And the first person up is our external auditor, and Steve, welcome, and you're on. I didn't turn my mic on, sorry, but there is a button up there for you to turn yours on. Matt's there. Now you're on.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Like Geraldine said, I'm Steve Flershinger from Magnus & McEwen Company, and we are the CPA firm who performs your external audit. And most recently, your fiscal year ended, of course, on June 30th of 2017. So I'm the director of audit, actually co-director, and so I've been a partner with Magnus & McEwen Company for over 30 years. And so, but this is not about me, this is about your school district. And so, but I wanted to let you know that we are required to be your auditor to obtain at least 40 hours of accounting and auditing continuing education year in and year out to be your auditor. And so we do that, plus we have 24 hours of those every 2 years has to be in the area of governmental accounting and auditing. Okay? So let's talk about what we do as an auditor. An audit's an examination and evaluation of the financial statements to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. With that, we express an opinion on your financial statements. We come in, we look at your internal controls, we look at your records, we look at your balances, so that we can prepare a financial statement, which is your financial statement, and we express an opinion on that. As I said, you guys are responsible for the presentation of the financial statements, and we express an opinion on that. Okay? So there's a lot of reasons that you are required to have an audit. First of all, the state of Idaho, the Legislative Auditor's Office, requires you to have an audit, as well as the Department of Education. Your audit is required to be in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards and the uniform guidance for federal programs. If you have federal expenditures of over $750,000, you're required to have what's called a federal single audit. And that requires us to look at your federal programs. And this year we looked at your nutrition cluster, which is the school lunch program. And so, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And of course, it's required by state statutes. We did express a clean opinion on your audited financial statements, which means that the financial statements that you have before you is without, you can rely on those financial statements. An outside reader of the financial statements can rely on those, because it does express that, but we did express a clean opinion indicating that there's reasonable assurance that can be relied upon. It has the presentation is adequate, and there's adequate disclosures to explain what the financial statements are all about. Another thing that we do is we prepare a report on internal controls over financial reporting. You have to have a good internal control system in order to in order for your financial statements to be able to be put together to be presented properly. And then finally, like I said, we looked at your nutrition cluster as far as the federal program that we look at. We look at different federal programs from year to year, so that we're not looking at the same one year after year. For example, next year we could probably look at Title I or Title 6B. We hope that Title 6B is still here, or excuse me, Title 2A is the one that is on the chopping block. But Title 6B, yeah, we could look at Title 6B. So anyway, you know, some folks may wonder what internal controls are all about. I mean, what does that term mean? And how does it relate to you as a school district? Simply put, they are processes that support the district's objectives for operational effectiveness and efficiency in putting together your financial statements. They provide a basis by which reliable financial reporting can be determined. And then you also have to have good internal controls in order to be in compliance with your laws and regulations, like your federal programs and your payroll taxes, those kinds of things. So, you know, here's some examples of good internal controls. And I picked these because your school district does a great job at these particular ones. First of all, the establishment of a separate fund to account for the receipts and expenditures of the district's supplemental tax levy. I have to tell you, there's not a lot of school districts in the state of Idaho who separate out their property tax receipts in a separate fund in order to account for all of those receipts and expenditures. Most of those are dumped into the general fund along with all of your other receipts and expenditures, but this fund that you have set up is separately set up only to receive property taxes and to expend monies for which those property taxes were promised to the taxpayers. Another good internal control is your internal audits of your student body funds. There's a lady over here, Mary Ann, who goes out and does that. She works with the principals and the secretaries out in the schools and looks at your student body funds. The State Department of Education considers student body funds to be the most at risk, I should say, as far as internal controls go. If you can imagine, of course, you know, at a football game, you know, you have who's receiving monies, you know, it's the high school students. But you know, as long as they're monitored well, there's no reason why that kind of a situation cannot exist. But like I said, because it's not the controls are not in one place in your district office, they're a little bit more at risk, as you can imagine. Dual signatures on checks is another good internal control, and segregation of duties, and you have all of those, along with a lot of other good internal controls.
Okay.
The management and discussion and analysis in your audited financial statements, I think those page numbers are actually incorrect, but that's okay. It's in the first part of your audited financial statements. This is what your management writes to explain the financial statements, where the district has been the past year, and the financial highlights for where the district management thinks they are going, and the challenges that they will face in coming years. And Lisa does a wonderful job of writing that. I'm always very impressed by her writing skills and putting on paper exactly where the school district's at and what the State Department of Education is doing to fund schools in the state of Idaho. And so, anyway, basically that sums up everything that's behind it. So if you don't look at anything else in the audit, in these reports, look at that, okay? Okay. Some financial highlights of the year. The district finished the year with a general fund balance of a little over $2.1 million, which represents 7.2% of total expenditures. So it was a decrease of about $191,000 from the prior year. Now the general fund, as you know, is probably the fund that it's a good indication of how healthy the financial position of the district is, because most of your general receipts and expenditures go through that fund. And for example, your state education monies, your most of your teacher salaries go through that fund that are not especially applicable to federal programs and school lunch and those kinds of things. So actual revenues in the general fund were about 2.7 million. Actual expenditures in the general fund were about 2.5 million. These are both higher, the amounts higher than budgeted. Of course, the actual revenues expenditures were quite a bit more than that, but that is how much it varied from budget. And the budget was not amended. The school district has an opportunity to amend the budget during the year, but if there's really no reason to do that, it's just, there's no reason to do that. One of the other reasons that you guys are unique is that you have no bonded indebtedness. In fact, you have no long-term obligations at all in your financial statements, with the exception of the net pension liability that was just began to be put into the financial statements a couple of years ago. And let me talk about that a little bit here, but the fact that you guys don't have any bonds, most school districts do. You don't have any, I don't think you have any capital leases either. And so that's huge. The fact that your district has kept you from having any bonds. There are some times that you need to think about doing that, but the fact that you don't have any right now is, puts you in a pretty good financial position. So, okay. The budget process is something that happens year-round. You guys generally are really working on it hard in the months of April, May, and June. But as you know, it doesn't just start there and end there. It's something that you're preparing and doing all year long. Once you pass this budget in June or whenever you do that, you're already starting on the next year's budget, because it's always, your financial operations are always in a state of flux, trying to work with what you are given as far as the State Department of Education. And so this is, as you know, is something that's, it's a tool, and a very important tool to monitor your financial operations. So let's talk about fund balance again, and especially in the general fund. First of all, it's important to have some kind of a cushion. And the reason it's important is because of these reasons up here. The revenue stream is not consistent from month to month. You have property taxes mainly coming in during 2 to 3 months out of the year. the State Department of Education monies don't show up all in 1 month. The fund balance keeps the district from borrowing unnecessarily. Provides resources in case of catastrophic events that you don't know that are going to be there. For example, last year's snow removal or maybe a repair at a school building that all of a sudden you guys are met with some big repairs. Uncertainties of state and federal funding. The fact that your fund balance helps you ensure a good credit rating in case you ever do have to borrow monies through bonds. And of course, it helps ensure a future financial stability of your district. There's a governmental association out there that is recognized nationwide, and they recommend that at a minimum that general purpose governments like yours maintain no less than 1 to 2 months of regular general operating fund expenditures. Your school district is right at 1 month. So you're right at right down towards the bottom of that minimum. And so it's really important. And I know that you guys have discussed and have talked about goals in regarding to fund balance. And I think there's, like I said, it's a year-long process in maintaining a good financial operations, looking at your fund balance, and I think there are so many different things that you have to be concerned with in where the money's coming, where the money's going, and so it's an important deal. This is what your general fund balance has looked like the last 5 years. As you can see, it's dropping just a little bit, and so right now in 2017 it's lower than it has been in past years. There, shortly after your year end or a couple months after year end, I know that you did receive a large amount of monies from it was a lawsuit that you guys were involved with, that you got reimbursed for some costs that you will be able to add to next year's fund balance, and so that's a good start for next year, I guess. So. Okay. As far as total revenues and expenditures, this is where you've been in the last 5 years. Of course, you're bringing in more dollars, but you're spending more dollars, and your costs have gone up. 5 years, the consumer price index has increased greatly in 5 years, and so costs do not go down, that's for sure. This year, as you can see, your revenues did exceed your expenditures by just a little bit, and that's a pretty big bar, as you can see, and to be that close means that you've been using your budget as a tool to be that close. If you weren't that close, you probably, it would mean that you're not looking at your budget throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So with that, that's our presentation for this evening, and I'd be more than happy to try to answer any questions that the board might have and regarding the audit or anything else. Any questions? I'd like to thank your staff, who's always been very good to work with. Lisa and Mary Ann and a lot of other people, and I really appreciate that. It allows the audit to go very smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a question. You alluded to it, the retirement fund.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
The
Yeah, the net pension liability, about 4 or 5 years ago, you did not see it's something that the accounting profession and those people that set accounting standards decided that your net pension liability should be on your financial statements, and it never has been. And the reason this never has been is because it was such a difficult number to come up with. And so, because of the importance of it, and the accounting profession wanting it to be there, because it did provide some information as to the what the districts and all of the governmental entities throughout the country were looking at, you know, as far as the future funding of their pensions. I'm happy to say in the state of Idaho, you have a very strong pension fund in Percy. It's one of the strongest in the country, and in fact, it's almost fully funded. And I say that compared to other states. There are some places in the country like Illinois and California that they have a big hole to get out of. If you look at...
I think it's on page 52.
52,
yeah.
Sorry. Or you can go to...
So my question is, I mean, in 2015, it shows this liability is 4.7 million. In 2016, 8.3 million. In 2017, 12.4 million. I mean,
Yes.
why is it growing
It
so
is.
rapidly?
It is going up. Yes, and it's because of there's a lot of different factors, and it's some of it has to do with the investments that are Percy is funding, is using for you know, their to fund it, and so and they just haven't been able to. You know, it's been going, like you said, it's been going up in the last few years, and it all has to do with actuarial studies. And there's in your financial statements, there's a footnote to your financial statements that is about 5 pages long that discusses how that is funded and how that is calculated. We get those numbers actually from Percy, and you don't really have those recorded. You don't keep track of those on your books or anything like that, but we get those directly from Percy.
It's tripled in 3 years. Is that representative of the state?
Yes, it is. Everybody, you know, throughout the state, if you looked at their financial statements, you would see that net pension liability increasing every year. And I really think that it's going to go back down. I think that, I mean, this has been a good year for the stock markets, and, you know, Percy is somewhat invested in the stock market, and I think
So can you explain, what is this? Is this our liability for our current employees, or? You know?
Yes, well, yes, it is. And past employees.
Past employees.
Yeah, and so it's what you owe.
But haven't we been making the deposits to the state
Yes.
fund all along? So
Yes, you have. But this is, there's 3 different line items on your financial statements that somewhat offset each other a little bit. There's if you look, go to page 20 if you have your audited financial statements.
And
The pension liability is going up, but the funding that is in place to take care of those monies is also going up. It's called the deferred outflows of resources. Everybody on page 20? So about 1/3 of the way down, there's a line item called deferred outflows of resources, 8.4 million. So that's considered to be an asset that is there to help fund those obligations. And down below, you can see the net pension liability is 12.4 million. And so, there's one that offsets the other. The number up above is getting bigger as well. And they keep track of both of those numbers. And so it's something that you have to take both of those line items into account.
So I'm a little bit confused. I mean, if we're making these deposits, why is this a liability?
You still have to pay it. If everybody retired today, the whole pool, that's what you're gonna have.
Yes, that's what you'd have to pay.
12,400,000 that's if everybody retired right today, and you have to pay all those people's pension and everybody else that's retired that's on a pension plan.
But not
not gonna
everybody's going to retire today. And the monies that are out there to grow to support
Future retirement.
those future retirees
Yeah.
is in the pool as well. If you want to really blow your mind, you can look at those 5 pages in the pages 42 through 48
Right.
that talks about the Percy and how it is funded and so anyway, that's all I can say is it's just the pension liability is going up, but it's a big deal. Percy's audited by a big national accounting firm, and they look at the actuarial studies for this program, and these numbers come down from Percy to us, and you can see that the net pension liability is growing, but it's growing for everybody in the state. But the resources are also growing as well to fund it. So,
Right.
and like I said, Percy is probably one of the strongest in the country as far as retirement plans, as far as governmental employees.
So I would just
I know
like
that doesn't
to,
answer your question the way you wanted it to.
I would just like to add that this entire packet, as well as the PowerPoint information, will be online tomorrow. So anybody who is listening and wondering what we're talking about, these documents will be online. So.
And I will admit that our auditing firm, our firm is not capable and not qualified to audit Percy, because there are only the very, very large accounting firms in the country can audit Percy, but I can only speak from the information that we are given to present in your financial statements.
So this number, this 12.4 million,
that's real. It is real.
it's a real. Okay, where'd that number come from? I mean, did you calculate that number?
No,
Did
it
Lisa
came
calculate
from
that number?
Percy.
Did Percy calculate that?
Yeah, Percy calculated that number, and you have less than 1% of all of the state retirees in the state of Idaho. It's well less than 1%, in fact, 0.01 maybe. And so anyway, but if you looked at the total pension obligation for the state of Idaho, it's a very, very huge number. But there are some very big resources that are in place to fund those pension obligations as well. So like I said, these numbers it's not something that the district calculates, it's not something that we calculate, it's something that has been given to us by your Percy that's run by the state of Idaho.
And real quick, if I may, that the internal controls that the district employs are unique to every district. And so I want to thank Lisa and Mary Ann for the thoroughness of our internal controls. And while sometimes I know Mary Ann specifically has to play the role of, someone coming in to audit the books can be kind of a tough thing, or someone who has to approve different expenditures, et cetera, and make sure people follow the processes. It has kept us with a really tight checks and balances, and it ensures that we get really good audits as well. So thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yeah.
Yes, if you feel like they are the school teacher with the ruler in their hand, that's for a very good reason.
Well, we don't do that anymore in our district. The ruler thing.
That's true. That went out.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you,
Okay.
Steve, for your presentation.
Thank you. And again, thank you for Lake Pend School District and for the staff that is so easy to work with. Appreciate that.
So we're going to follow Steve's presentation with a financial update from our Chief Financial Officer, Lisa Halls. Thank you.
Good evening. This will be very brief, but I do have a few important points to share. First, our chairperson just mentioned that the entire audit will be posted on our district's website tomorrow, and this management and discussion and analysis, which is relatively long, is also posted separately, because the audit report, if someone's trying to download it, is well over 60 pages. I'd also like to mention that in your board packets, we have traditionally had what we call the treasurer's report and all of the student body fund reports monthly. This is supplemental information. This is not something that's required under Idaho code and the transparency laws. And we're going to move to including those quarterly. All of the things that are statutorily required under the transparency laws will continue to be in your monthly board packets and posted online. Steve did mention that we ended fiscal year 17, so June 30th of 2017, expending $191,000 more dollars than we took in revenue. But really, the sole reason for that was we had to make a payment to our wide area network provider. I discussed that at the September board meeting, and we were waiting the federal government's ruling on the grant dollars. And a year and 7 or 8 months after we applied, the third week in September, we were approved, which means that we received $171,000 back in late September, which will be redeposited into our fund balance. So we really ended the year of a $30 million budget within $12,000, which is
Remarkable.
really remarkable. Other good news to report, is Steve also touched on this in his presentation, is that the public retirement system of Idaho is really one of the strongest performing retirement systems in the country, and they had slated a rate increase of 1% for July 1st of 2018, and in their board meeting last Tuesday, because of their financial position, they are now deferring that to July 1st of 2019, which for us means that we had anticipated that when we were discussing our revenues into the future, and that would be about a $90,000 annual savings for us, along with just the state of Idaho for all of the agency budgets that have salaries tied to that, and that they cover the PERSI component. Then the final two things I want to discuss are that our board met with Senator Keogh and Representative Dixon in kind of later September to give a state of the state academically and financially. We spent a fair bit of time discussing the potential changes to some of trustee reporting laws, and also Representative Dixon sits on the 10-person committee looking at the K-12 funding formula committee. Since that meeting, that committee has met twice, and I would say, as someone following that over the last year and a half now, almost 2 years, that these last 2 meetings, they've really made some progress in refining what potentially would be some tangible recommendations to the legislature this upcoming session. And those, the first thing is that they hired a consultant. Her name is Margarita Rosa. She did recommend that the committee recommend to the state that there be a non-voter approved property tax component to the state's funding formula. And the current committee has rejected that. That's not something they're willing to include as a potential recommendation. Other things, however, that they have arrived at consensus are that they want to transition from a current funding formula based on average daily attendance to one that's based on enrollment. And then, of course, they need to define what enrollment means and when that enrollment is reported. That's one. And then two, the other big thing that they have agreed upon is moving to what do they call it? A transition to a per student dollar amount, where there would be a base, and then there would be sort of add-ons for different types of students: an at-risk student, a special education student, maybe a pregnant student. I mean, they haven't determined what those add-ons to the base would be. And then finally, there's discussion on, well, how long would it take to transition? Would it be implemented over 1 year or several years? Representative Dixon said that probably, when we met with him in September, another 3 to 5 years. But there's a pretty strong sentiment so far from what I've heard in the committee. They don't want to elongate it. They think that that would confuse things. They do have a deadline of November 30th, and their final meeting is November 13th, and I'll keep you updated on that. And then the final piece is that there's no information from the federal government yet still on an adopted budget. We are, yeah. So those conclude my prepared remarks. Are there any questions?
Do you look upon the developments of this committee as positive for our district? So moving to an enrollment-based calculation, depending on how they define enrollment, and Tim Hill, who is the head of the financial part of the State Department of Education, presented to the committee that, well, on average, enrollment is about 90, average daily attendance is about 94%. And we happen to fall right in that, with one outlier. Alternative high school has had a little bit lower average daily attendance, and it's really worked in the last couple of years to bring that percentage up. The key is going to be, well, what's the base and what types of additional funding would be provided. We're a very rural district. Yeah, we're getting a differential now for some of our rural schools.
Right, two of our schools, but how potentially they would define rural, it's just too premature for me to answer that. I think that they have left two really strong, important factors out of what I'm currently hearing might be recommendations. One, facilities, and two, including a non-voter approved property tax component in the funding formula. And that was true until 2006. That was called equalization, and that was repealed. So,
Oh, no.
The jury's out.
yeah, they have an enormous task underhand, and
But moving to the enrollment, to me, sounds positive, because, urban school districts, well, we're at 94%, you say?
right.
That's pretty good, that's very good for a rural school
Yeah.
district. But urban school districts could be 97, 98.
Right, so from a budgeting standpoint, for someone in a financial management position, moving to an enrollment number is easier to project than an average daily attendance number.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So we have a opportunity to approve our consent agenda. If there's a motion,
I move we approve the consent agenda. Second. Over.
Hurley seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Motion passes. So we have Bobby Coleman coming to present to us on first readings of the policies that involve our food services.
Thank you. I have some revisions that I put in front of each of you, and I also have a few extra copies if someone would like to view any of these. Well, thank you very much for hearing me today, and please excuse me, this is my first, in 23 years with the district, this is my first actual policy revision. So if I fumble through this a little bit, I'm hoping for your help on this with me. In this packet I'm a very visual person, so I just gave you the entire packet in order again, and I'll go through what the revisions are that the committee made on this again. Just a little history. In 2007, USDA came in and they said that any school district that operates or receives any federal funding for national school lunch, breakfast, Title I, Title VI, or anything, was required to adopt a wellness policy for the entire district. And it encompassed food sold in the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program. It encompassed physical activity and vending machines and a wide variety of things. When they did that, they didn't give a lot of direction on what should be inside that policy. So at the time, the seated board, it was important to them to use the ISBA model that came out as an example. And so that's what the first policy was based on. And then in 2009, they had done some studies in the meantime after the policies in all of the school districts were approved. And they did some studies and found out that there wasn't a lot of impact that the policies had made on childhood obesity and changing nutrition because the policy regulations were so vague. So they came back and they wanted school districts to update the policies to include, say, no caffeine at school, no candy being sold at school, no vending machines in elementary schools and things like that. So in 2009, the USDA came in and said that, so then we revised our policies again to match the ISBA model. At the time, again, the seated board felt that that was important to do. So then in 2013, USDA came back and they wanted to even make the guidelines more strict with the Healthy Hunger Free Act that came in. And so they wanted to include regulations for all food sold in schools to have a specific caloric, sugar intake, certain size of drinks that could be sold to students. And so they wanted to make those guidelines a lot more strict. So they came out with regulations that are called Smart Snacks in Schools, and that's what this blue pamphlet is. It's just an information pamphlet for you. And so all schools were supposed to put this into policy, into their procedures, which we did. And then they came back and said, we'd like this to be included in your wellness policy, and everyone needs to update their wellness policy to include these new regulations in there. So that's why we're here today. So we're actually a little bit behind on this. We need to update our policy because currently, right now, we're not in compliance with it. We are in compliance with following the regulations, but we need to update our policy so that it meets compliance as well. So the reason for the revisions are we've had some comment period. We've had some discussion with our physical education teachers. I sent out the updates to all of our principals, our administration, a few of the administrators, and we've had some discussion. And so there's a couple policies that we had originally requested to be deleted, and I'll go through those that we're going to ask not to, and a couple different changes on there. So 80, I'll just start with 8200. Just the first one. So on 8200, we had originally, in the first copies that you received, requested that the physical activity portion on the second page, along with some other things, be stricken from policy. And after further discussion, it turns out that when ISBA redid their model policy, that portion was removed originally because they made a separate policy in the curriculum portion of their district or their national policies. So we found out that we don't actually have a separate curriculum physical activity policy, and that's why we're asking for that not to be removed until we can write a new policy and with our curriculum educators. And so we'd like that portion to remain in there. And so I've taken that out, the stricken lines out on that. But everything else in 8200 that we proposed, we'd like to request to still have those changes made.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, on page 2, you're not removing 3, 4, 5. You'll say leave in.
Correct. All,
Okay.
the entire physical
Leave in that
activity
whole
portion,
section.
physical
Yeah.
activity goals, physical activity, K through 12, we're gonna leave that entire portion.
Yeah,
I
actually,
think page 3 is page.
It's
yeah,
page-
not
yeah,
this.
I don't have my-
Oh, okay,
Page
okay.
3
That's
to
what I was
4.
like,
So
perfect.
page 3,
Yes.
page 4, where it goes
3
into
and 4, I
safe
see that.
routes for schools.
So
Okay.
we are still striking on
Yes.
page 2.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Okay? Fine, fine, yes.
Okay, so that's on 8200.
Just one thing, this is the one that I talked
The
to Gary
numbering.
about, the numbering on page 2.
Yes, he had some concerns when we filled this in. We added in some of the ISBA model policies and those numbers floated over. I'll go ahead and make a note and correct those numbers went from before the second reading.
Those 1, 2, 6.
Right.
or
Yes.
1, 2, 65, 6.
Yes, I'll go
It
ahead
gets-
and make the
gets-
correction to those before
Yeah.
the second reading and present you with a clean copy.
That would be great, yeah,
Okay.
that was one of the, okay.
Okay, and then the next portion of this, you'll see this implementation and monitoring form. And it's my understanding that forms are not actually submitted into to policy, but I think it's
Right.
important that we have discussed these and that you're aware of these, because this is part of the updated requirement for wellness policies that every school district's supposed to have an implementation and a monitoring plan, so we can, see how we're following and managing that policy. And it actually has to be done annually through the superintendent's office. And so in the past, we have not had that implementation tool, and we need to adopt that as part of this policy. The other portion of that is the Idaho Wellness Policy Progress Report, which is also another new addition and requirement as part of our update. And so that's why you have this in here, and that's something that has to be filled out by every school administrator annually as part of our requirement.
Okay, very good.
So 8210. is exactly the same as was presented before. No changes have been made to that than what were originally in your packet.
I noticed that on the committee membership for this,
Yes.
8210, there's a board member added in.
Yes,
So that's
and a
something-
healthcare professional. Previously,
Yeah.
in the past, we actually did have the dietitian from Bonner General Hospital in attendance at all the committee meetings I've been present at in the past. We also have invited our school nurses. This is who you're supposed to invite. You can still invite and hold your committee meetings 3 times a year if you still don't have those members, but you have to make your best effort to include all of those
Okay.
stakeholders.
Great. Okay.
In fact, in the past, we've had students from the high school and the elementary school that we've asked to participate in the committee, and they had some great feedback. Part of
Yeah,
it.
I'm sure.
Okay, so 8230 is exactly the same as previously issued to you and requested for the revisions as well. And again, these revisions that are in here are going with the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010, but updated with the Smart Snacks regulations from December of 2013 that really started in 14-15.
Right.
So there's actually 7 different policies within the wellness policy, and 8240, I apologize, was not in your original packet. I included it here in the revisions for you.
Yeah.
There's only 2 sentences on this that we're asking to be removed and 1 sentence to be added, and that's in the middle portion. It talks about a la carte and the nutrition standards, and that really is just a correction on that the nutrition standards for all a la carte and all foods sold must meet the Smart Snacks regulations.
Okay.
So, just mentioned a motion to amend the agenda to include these policies.
Just this 8240
Just
is
this.
Yep,
not on the agenda.
because it wasn't on the original agenda. Do we do it at the end of the presentation or
You
right
could do
now?
it now if you'd like.
So I'd like to hear a motion to amend our agenda to include a first reading of policy 8240 as presented here in front of you.
I move that we amend the agenda to include policy 8240.
Second motion.
Okay, moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Thank you. So we have amended the agenda, and it's just for those 2 sentences you just referenced.
2 sentences to be stricken and 1 to be
One
added.
added. Okay.
Okay, policy 8250, no revisions to that policy other than what were already presented in the packet.
It seems like a whole lot of detail is being eliminated from the policies because it's provided in the other regulations.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of detail that is just simple things that, it said half of whole grains in the district must be, half of grains must be whole grains. Now it's 100% of all of our grains must be whole grains. So just some terminology changes nutritional aspect wise. And the final is 8260. And this one we are asking to still be deleted from policy. And the reason is because it's the vending machine portion of the wellness policy. And if you look at 8250, I believe it's on the 2nd page. The vending machines are addressed in that updated policy based on the Smart Snacks regulations. So really, this would just be a duplicate of 8250's update if that's approved.
Okay. Anybody have questions on that? It's on page 2. So 8260 is the only deleted policy
Correct.
out of this packet. Okay.
Did I miss 8220?
It's in there.
So
Yeah,
if
it was
you,
in there.
if you look right on here, initially they were going to delete it, but they are not going to delete it until they've had a chance to rewrite it separately, review it. So that is staying as is right now, not being revised
Correct.
or deleted. This is a first reading. We don't make a motion on these, but we do have the opportunity today to ask any questions that you have. If there are any, it's fairly straightforward, but
I
this
don't
is your
have a
chance.
question specifically about this, but just generally, I mean, are we serving whenever possible, you know, locally sourced fresh fruits and vegetables?
We do. We do farm to school in our district, in the National School Breakfast and Lunch Program, as well as when we do after-school snack programs. We locally source as much as possible. We do have very large bids that locally in our area can be considered quite a wide area because we don't have a great growing season, but we do take advantage of that as much as possible.
Didn't we get our milk? I remember seeing our milk coming from the school board or something, somewhere. Yeah.
Can students bring their own food to school? Their own
Absolutely.
lunches?
yeah, they still brown bag. Yep.
And none of this wellness policy, we cannot, USDA cannot give guidelines on what students can bring to school. It's encouraged that they bring nutritionally balanced meals and that they consume those meals that they bring just like ours, but we don't have any regulations and can't deny students. Like the peanut allergy issues and things like that, we'll never be able to say we're a peanut-free school or school district because we have, you know, kids that come in and they've eaten a toast with peanut butter on it for breakfast and touched every doorknob and everything else, and we don't have, we do the best that we can. What we serve and we can't control what's brought in.
Correct. So do we have any other questions for Bobby related to these policies you see in front of you? Thank you for presenting.
Bobby.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We have an opportunity, do I need this on? We have a chance now to look at the ISBA's proposed 2018 resolutions. When we go down to the ISBA conference in November, those of us who are there on the last day will hear dialogue on each one of these. They'll be presented to the entire group. We'll hear some back and forth conversation. A few may be revised right there on the floor, and then we vote. But for those of you not attending the conference, this is a chance to look through this list, ask questions right here if you have any. James is here. I know a couple of them relate to transportation. I've jotted down some notes on them. We're not going to read in detail each of these because you got this packet in advance to look at.
And we've been
There
provided with discussion on each
Yep,
one of these. Yeah.
exactly. Statement of purpose, each one of these has content with them. Out of 17, 3 have already been pulled, and it's possible even that at the conference itself, others could be pulled. It's kind of a dynamic process, but right now we've looked at these 14, and ISBA has made a recommendation on a few of them. I have a couple questions that are kind of general that I may address to Sean or Kelly, who knows a lot about ISBA, Lisa or James as we go through, but they're kind of general. I will be at the conference, I believe. Gary, are you there for Friday?
I'm planning on it.
And Pearlie's planning on going. But we'll definitely take votes from Lonnie and Carrie before we go down. At some point, you can just email me your do or do not pass, and we will include that when we cast our vote down there. We're allowed to cast for our absent. Yep.
So do we vote as a district or as individuals?
As individuals. So we have the opportunity to not agree if we don't want to. And then all of those votes are pooled from every district, individuals. I have just a few questions. I'll go through mine first, and if there are a few at the end that any of you have that. On resolution number 2, seatbelts in school buses. Obviously I want to hear from James Kohler, our transportation director, just on his thoughts on it. And also, this is just to establish an interim committee to evaluate it. And I can't remember, they don't really say what sort of costs is associated, but it would be at the state level. It wouldn't be a cost we'd absorb, but I was just kind of curious. Thoughts on this conversation?
You want me to use the microphone or just speak?
Sure. And in fact, there's only 2 that address transportation. I'll ask the other question right after this. So
Okay.
then you.
So regarding seatbelts, it's been a big issue for the last few years, and I think it's coming whether we want it to or not. But I wouldn't be in any rush to be the first people mandating it. And there's a reason for that. You mentioned the cost.
Yeah.
So it's about $10,000 per bus to outfit that. It's about 20 on older buses, and so we put them on new buses. It's about, I think they said between 7 to 12,000. So if you average that out, maybe you've got 10,000. The state would reimburse that at 50%.
Oh, okay.
So the district cost would be about $5,000 per bus. And at the current rate that we're buying 3 buses per year, that'd be about $15,000 our cost and $15,000 to the state. So that would be one consideration. Yes.
If it was mandated, though, you'd have to outfit all your buses, correct? Or
Depends on how it's mandated.
If it's mandated, I don't think they would retrofit old buses. I think it would say
Okay.
all new buses.
All buses, okay.
That's what, there's 6 states that have mandated seatbelts,
And that's how they've done it.
and they've done it for new
Oh.
buses. Yeah, because if you do old buses, you have to pull all the seats out, take out all the floorboards, replace the flooring, and do a lot of other stuff that's very expensive. So it's not very cost effective.
So one of the things about this is that we're not saying, we're not voting on a do put seatbelts in or don't put seatbelts in.
Right.
We're saying do or do not establish an interim committee to evaluate it.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a,
What's the safety statistic? Do they work? Do they help?
So there's not a lot of data. So far, buses are the safest way to school, to and from school. There's on average 5 students that are killed in school bus crashes per year nationally. So I don't know how accurate that is. I read one article that said it was like a 1 in 1.6 billion chance that you would die if you rode a school bus, just because of all the miles and students riding every day. It's statistically very low that you would die on a school bus. The compartmentalization was designed in the 70s, and it's very effective, and I think seatbelts would impact the capacity, because
yeah.
you're looking at a 71 passenger school bus with 3 seatbelts in each seat. I don't know how that would work, so I would want to see how other school districts were doing that before I put seatbelts in my bus, because we do have some that are near capacity that I think would affect that. And there's just a lot of other safety considerations, like how do you...
Aren't school children, especially the youngest ones, the most vulnerable to injury during accidents because of their weight?
Well, I don't know. I don't know who's more vulnerable. I think in each scenario it would be different. I can't predict what would happen in a crash, but I think the compartmentalization, as long as you're sitting in your seat and you do a head-on collision, the seat's going to absorb the impact. Versus if you're in a seatbelt, I don't know if that's going to make it any safer or not. Maybe they say in a side collision it would.
Well,
So this, and kind of reiterate what you said, Geraldine, is, I want to make sure I understand this. This is just to appoint a committee.
it's
talk
to
about
appoint
it.
a
So-
committee.
Okay.
So we'll move on. It's
Okay.
good to know your kind of overview on that.
Yeah.
The other one I have, just a fast question on is resolution number 11. And it references transportation reimbursement. And one of my questions was, I don't know if the others have this, talks about calculating transportation reimbursements at 50% and 85%. Which students fall into those categories in a broad stroke sense?
So it's not based on students, it's based on expenses. So I have a matrix, I thought you might want to know about that, so I can give you that.
Yeah, okay.
The matrix says these expenses in transportation are reimbursed at 50%, these transportation expenses are reimbursed at 85%, and these expenses are not reimbursed.
Yes.
That's basically how it works.
Okay.
And I have a matrix that I actually like to give you just if you've never seen it before, because I think if you have a chance to vote yes for the flat 85%, I would highly recommend it. It would definitely simplify.
I agree, it would simplify the process. What's the likelihood?
Yeah, this is the matrix that we use,
Okay, great.
and it'll tell you exactly what's reimbursed at what rate.
And you know, one of the considerations here is how time consuming this process is.
Yes,
And so going to 85% across the board would simplify it.
for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had a
You do
new,
a report, you know, based on this
We do.
matrix, you know, what, every month, you know, you have to file your report or
Annually.
annually?
Yeah.
yeah. So I had a do pass on that. While James is up, do you have any questions on either of these two resolutions? Okay, so thank you, James.
Thank you.
I'll just see, there were, you know, I had a quick question, and it's more curiosity. They have a resolution number 3, revision on Idaho code on excising, I just don't know, Post Falls put this one in, I submitted it, I just don't know that, do you know?
I don't
Has
know the
Post
history on
Falls
Post Falls.
ever,
No, Lisa may.
ever had that issue?
I'm not sure why specifically.
I
it came
just
from
can't
them.
see it impacting our
They may
district
have, they
directly,
do
but.
have some, I do recall now, they are having some issues related to some of the new building that's going in down there between themselves and Coeur d'Alene. Do you remember that, Andrea? I can't remember the specific issue, but they want to start having conversations about that moving forward. I do know that.
And it has affected this district.
Oh, it has,
Years ago, that's right, 9
West
years ago,
Bonner
10
County.
years ago.
when West Bonner County. Hold up.
And East Bonner County tried to excise after I started teaching here. But because of an abnormality in their request, it was thrown out by the state.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Oh, look at her.
So, yeah, it is.
So it
is
has
a-
impacted
it is-
us.
It can impact you very quickly.
So-
And the way it's currently written, it's only the people that are in the excision area that get to vote on
They
it.
get to vote.
But it
Yeah.
would also impact all the rest of the district
Yeah,
and those taxpayers.
I thought it was
So, yeah,
written the way it is. I was
it's
a new
an
one.
important one, I think.
Right.
Okay, glad you brought that up, I didn't know that.
So I had a question on resolution number 4 for Lisa. They talk about receiving education allocation. That's something that would impact our district, or it would come through from the state level, that education allocation?
Sorry, I have to reread it.
No, that's okay. It's resolution number 4. It's talking about.
Right, so what it's saying, right now is under the state's career ladder allocation module, if a teacher comes from out of state, we can't, when we report to the State Department of Education, use their prior years to
Right.
basically place them potentially higher on this career
Right.
ladder rung, and that's frankly a disincentive for any school district in Idaho and for the state as a whole when there's a teacher shortage.
Right.
Oh, so yes, this is why
So
they're
some
saying
of that,
do pass.
yeah,
right.
they're saying do pass, and some of
Right.
that would trickle through the state's career ladder allocations then. If we increase the teachers that qualify for this education allocation, it's hard for me to say that.
Well, this is referring to the state's career ladder, not
Right,
ours.
right.
You know, we happen to be a school district that has implemented a career ladder. Most have not.
Right,
But,
okay.
so it would be an additional cost to the
At the
state
state level, right.
because the projected 5-year tier-in did not include this provision.
Right. It just made me curious on whether they'd approve it or not.
So what's the policy of this district?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Do we give credit
You
for?
know,
For how many years, Lisa, do we allow? Do you remember? Yeah, 9 years.
It is part of our teacher contract.
Yeah, and we, I believe, had moved it up each year, another year. I think we're hoping, we wanted to get to 9, I believe.
I can't remember what it was when I started here, but we have, as a district, on a concerted basis, moved the allowable years up. So 9 now, and I think there would be a pretty strong assumption that would move to 10 next year.
Stay close, Lisa, because the next one is ISBA Resolution 6. And and this is at the state level. It talks about the general fund contingency limit with the 5%, the contingency reserve law, 5% cap. Was wondering if...
Right, so it's actually, it's not at the state level. What the Idaho code says is when a school district is building and adopting a budget, that in their general fund, they can budget up to 5%, not to exceed 5% as a contingency line item.
Right.
For example, of our, $28 million general fund, we have $130,000 far below the 5%
Right.
in the contingency line item. And this is,
Yeah.
the argument here is, well, that the funding formula committee, the funding formula may be dramatically revised, and that they want to provide districts with more flexibility, perhaps because maybe a district doesn't project the revenues correctly.
Right, and I didn't have a feeling yes or no, and we didn't have ISBA didn't make a recommendation, so that's kind of on each of you.
I would think that, what's the harm in letting a district decide how they want to budget their own contingency? Like,
You mean raising that?
yeah, if you want to have more, go ahead
Yeah.
and try to budget more. However, if you don't need it, you don't need it.
Right.
Obviously, we've been knocking it out of the park with ours, so we need it.
Okay, Lisa, one other quick question on Resolution 7 with the CTE. That also is something that kind of adds to, the salary base. How does it impact our budget for salaries?
Well, let's see, last year was the first time that the state provided, I'm going to call it a stipend, for lack of a better word, or additional funding if a CTE teacher held, what is it called, the occupational specialist certificate, 1, and 2 was teaching in that discipline that the certificate was held by.
Right.
So, for example, right now we have 12 CTE teachers in the district, and we pay out that stipend. That we have one brand new teacher this year that hasn't provided a copy of the certificate, and we have one other teacher, so that one is not receiving the stipend, and we have one other teacher who has a certificate but is not teaching in that.
Right. Oh, wait.
So of the 12, 2 are not. So for us, it's not, as this resolution is written well, we're hiring people with that certificate.
Right.
So financially, it wouldn't be a big impact.
It wouldn't be a
to
big,
us.
okay.
But for other districts, it may be a way to recruit potential CTE teachers.
We're all in flash mode. I'm not sure it matters. But yeah, I did not have any other, those were the only ones I really highlighted as wanting a little clarification. Let me just double check. Yeah. So, did any of you have other questions that would help you formulate how you're going to vote, mainly Lonnie and Carrie? The rest of us will have an opportunity to understand these in a bigger forum.
No, I didn't have any. Most of them that I saw, I agreed with ISBA. I think the others we mentioned, seatbelts, of course, was one. Incentives for teachers. A lot of these come down to money, and I'm surprised that when they put these in, that they don't have the cost effect, budget effect. Normally, you would have that when they make a decision what the cost is going to be. So, a few of them are kind of nice to have if the state would fund it.
Right.
But without knowing what the cost would be, and I doubt very seriously whether the state's going to pick up the bill on some of these and fund them. So.
It's hard to say. I had a question for, maybe Sean might know why, on Resolution 17, ISBA had a do not pass recommendation, and I just...
Oh, that's funny, because Lisa and I asked her this evening, I said, why in the world would they have do not pass on that?
Does anybody know?
I think it's down at the bottom of the first page. They're not going to support any resolution or legislation that would result in any new line item in the state education
And that
budget.
one is a new line item?
That one, I think, would be a new line item.
It would be.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Oh, and that is true. They have held up on that.
And that's because of the career ladder.
Yeah.
They want that to be funded before they start.
So they have no
pushing
problem
line
adding in
items.
other things, but there are already line items
Yeah.
that are, yeah, you're right on that. If there's no other questions on those,
But
I
don't they
would,
have, I mean, there are incentives that, like at the University of Idaho, they have special scholarships for students, pursuing teaching degrees. Isn't that?
But that's already in. And this one,
This is a
the way it
different-
was written, it would require a new line item.
I
think, in
understand
the
that.
budget.
Lonnie and Carrie, if you would email your vote recommendations. If there are any that you're in question about, you can just say, I'll vote with the group after you hear the discussion on the floor. That's you're certainly entitled to do that if you want to do that. But just make sure that before it can be before that Friday, November 10th. 9th.
You're not coming that day, or you're not coming at all?
No, I'm gone that.
He's gone.
Home back end of that week. Yeah.
So that is the last thing on our, last itemized thing on the agenda. Do we have any announcements? Andra, there's no principals here. Sean?
Yep, just a quick one. So last week, our Design for Change students, or students who are going to Spain
Yeah.
to present their project, they presented to the Bonner General Hospital Foundation Advisory Board, and they did a great job. And then just yesterday or the day before, I can't remember when, a film crew from Los Angeles came up to interview the students and some staff, because they're doing a documentary on the trip, which is really cool. So they've interviewed the students. I think they asked them their perception of what will it be like to compete against 33 other countries for this project, and they'll interview them again when they come back. And I was talking with Ann Dickinson, the teacher, and she was asking them if, what would be the process to get them there, to be a screening of it at the Canada when it's finished, and have the students come up and do a panel and whatnot. So pretty
Kind of
amazing.
fun.
Yeah, so I'll keep you posted on that moving forward.
And although a little heartache for boys soccer, girls,
Girls made it to the championship and unfortunately lost 2-1
Yeah,
against
then-
our arch nemesis, Bishop Kelly.
yeah.
Yeah, but the cross-country team heads to state this weekend, and both the boys and girls will do very well, I think, there. So,
Great.
yeah.
And the football guys are going on.
Yeah, and you know what? They were getting a question about their really hard schedule in the, you know, the early games, but maybe it paid off, right? So
That's right, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no,
Isn't Clarkport also going?
Yeah.
They are. I don't know who their first opponent is though,
Not either,
but they made it as well. So
which is,
keep an eye
yeah,
out too, right?
which is rare.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Okay, no other announcements, meeting adjourned.